The wind was trying to bury something on that mountain long before anyone realized what it was. Snow blasted sideways across the ridge as Travis clawed at an ice-choked vent with bare hands. Behind him, deep inside the cave, Duke's barking echoed through the darkness, sharp and urgent. A freezing gust cut through his jacket, and somewhere below, the entire valley had vanished beneath a wall of white. Then the airflow suddenly changed, and Travis understood something was terribly wrong. What do you think was happening on that mountain? The wind came down hard from the high ridges of the Bighorn Mountains that afternoon, carrying the kind of cold that arrived weeks before winter officially did. Travis Walker stood beside his aging pickup truck and watched a strip of yellow grass bend under the gusts. The sky above northern Wyoming was a dull sheet of gray, and somewhere beyond the distant hills, snow was already falling. At 59 years old, Travis had spent most of his life enduring things: combat deployments, long nights in Iraq, the slow decline of his wife, Emily. But standing outside the Johnson County courthouse that day felt strangely heavier than all of them, because this loss was final. The court had finished dividing what remained of Emily's family property. The lawyers were gone. The paperwork was signed. The arguments had ended, and Travis had lost. A low whine pulled his attention downward. Duke stood beside him, the old German shepherd pressed against his leg, his thick coat moving in the wind. The dog's amber eyes never left Travis's face. "Yeah," Travis muttered quietly. "I know." Across the parking lot, Harold Bennett climbed into his new ranch truck. Emily's older brother looked satisfied for the first time in years. The ranch, the barns, the cattle contracts, the grazing leases, all of it now belonged to him. Everything except one thing. Harold slammed his truck door and walked back across the gravel. Several townspeople lingered nearby, pretending not to listen. Everyone listened anyway. Harold stopped a few feet away. His heavy ranch coat snapped in the wind. "You got exactly what the judge said you deserved." Travis said nothing. There was no point. Harold had blamed him for Emily's death ever since the funeral. Nothing Travis could say would change that. Harold pointed toward the mountains rising beyond town. "You still got that piece of land up there." His voice carried just enough for others to hear. "The rocky patch nobody wanted. A few people shifted awkwardly. Others didn't," Harold continued. "And the cave." Someone near the courthouse steps laughed. Not loudly, just enough. "The cave's yours too," Harold said. "If you enjoy living like a wild animal, you should be happy." More laughter. Travis stared past him toward the mountains. Emily used to hate scenes. She used to squeeze his hand under restaurant tables whenever arguments started. "Let it go, Travis." That's what she always said. "Just let it go." Duke stepped closer. The dog's shoulder pressed lightly against his knee. A grounding touch. A familiar one. Harold shook his head. "I tried helping my sister for years." The anger in his voice sounded old now, worn out, like something he'd repeated too many times. "She stayed with you instead." Hairly lank. Travis finally looked at him. The cold wind moved between them. Emily's face flashed through his mind for an instant. Not the hospital version. Not the oxygen tanks. Not the coughing. The younger version. Laughing. Standing beside a campfire. 20 years ago. Healthy. Alive. Then the memory vanished. Harold looked away first. "That cave's all you've got left." He turned and walked back toward his truck. A moment later, the engine started. The vehicle disappeared down Main Street. Nobody spoke after that. The crowd slowly dispersed, one by one, leaving Travis standing alone beside the pickup. Just him and Duke. The dog watched the departing truck for several seconds before turning back toward his owner. Travis scratched behind one ear. "You ready to see our new mansion?" Duke's tail moved once. That was enough. 3 hours later, the town was far behind them. The road yeared as it climbed into the mountains. Pine forests thickened. Rocky cliffs appeared between stands of dark timber. By late afternoon, they reached the property. Travis parked at the end of an overgrown trail and killed the engine. Silence settled immediately. No traffic, no people, only wind. The land looked exactly as Harold had described it. Rough, steep, forgotten. Gray stone pushed through the earth everywhere. Nothing about it looked valuable. Nothing except the cave. It sat halfway up the hillside. A dark opening cut into the mountain itself, large enough to swallow a truck. The entrance faced south, protected from the worst northern winds. Travis noticed that immediately. Old habits. Always observing. Always assessing. He grabbed his backpack. Duke jumped from the truck. The dog moved stiffly at first, before falling into step beside him. Together they climbed the slope. The closer Travis got, the larger the cave appeared. Cold air drifted from inside. Not freezing, just cool, steady. The entrance opened into darkness. He stood there for several moments, listening. Nothing. No water. No animals. No movement. Still, he found himself studying the shadows the same way he once studied abandoned buildings overseas. A habit he never completely lost. He reached for the flashlight clipped to his belt. The beam cut into the darkness. Stone walls. Dust. A wide chamber. Deeper passages beyond. Travis entered carefully. Duke followed. The cave smelled of dry rock. Not damp. Not moldy. That surprised him. A place abandoned for decades should have smelled different. He crouched and touched the floor. Dry. Very dry. Interesting. For the next hour, he explored. Not deeply, just enough to understand the layout. The main chamber was large, the ceiling high. Several narrow cracks ran through sections of the stone walls. Potential airflow, potential problems, potential advantages. Outside, daylight slowly faded. By sunset, Travis returned to the entrance. He built a small campfire, just beyond the cave mouth. Nothing fancy, just enough heat for coffee. Duke settled beside the flames. The dog's muzzle had gone gray over the years. So had Travis's beard. They looked old together. The thought almost made him smile. As darkness covered the mountain, the temperature dropped quickly. Stars appeared overhead. The wind strengthened. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled. Travis sat with a metal cup in his hands and stared into the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes. He thought about Emily, about losing the ranch, about how strange life could be. One day you owned a home. The next day you owned a cave. Duke lifted his head suddenly. His ears rotated forward. Every muscle in his body tightened. Travis noticed immediately. The old canine never reacted without reason. What is it? Duke stood. The dog wasn't looking outside. He wasn't watching the trees. He wasn't tracking an animal. He was staring into the cave, straight into the darkness behind them, motionless, silent, listening. The fire crackled softly. The wind hissed through the pines. But Duke remained fixed on whatever waited beyond the flashlight's reach. A long minute passed, then another. Travis slowly set down his coffee. His hand moved instinctively toward the flashlight. The old familiar feeling returned, the one he hadn't felt in years. Observation, assessment. Something isn't right. Deep inside the cave, beyond the reach of the firelight, darkness stretched back into the mountain. And for the first time that day, Travis had the distinct feeling that the cave might be more than just an abandoned hole in the rock. Duke took one cautious step forward, then stopped, still staring. As if he had heard something moving far beneath the mountain itself. Travis did not move right away. Old training had taught him that movement without information was how men got hurt. He let the fire burn behind him and listened past it, past the pop of sap in the wood, past the wind brushing through the pines outside the cave mouth. Duke stood in front of him, body low, ears forward, not growling. That mattered. If it had been a bear, a cougar, or some stray animal bedded deeper in the stone, Duke would have sounded different. His weight would have shifted into his front paws. His lips would have pulled back. But this was not aggression. This was attention. Travis picked up the flashlight and angled the beam into the cave. The white circle of light slid over rough stone, dry dust, a broken beer bottle from some teenager years ago, then deeper into the black mouth of the rear passage. Nothing moved. Still, Duke took another step. "Duke," Travis said quietly. The dog stopped. One command. No leash. No argument. Travis rose from beside the fire and slipped the flashlight into his left hand. His right hand brushed the folding knife clipped inside his jacket pocket before he realized he had done it. He let out a slow breath through his nose. Not Fallujah. Not a doorway in a half-cleared block. Not a stairwell with dust hanging in the air and radio static in his ear. Just Wyoming. Just rock. Just his dog. He stepped into the cave. Duke moved beside him. The temperature changed within 10 feet. Outside, air had teeth. Inside, the bite softened. The darkness seemed thick, but the air did not feel dead. That was what kept tugging at Travis's attention. Most abandoned places had a stale heaviness to them. This cave did not. It felt as if something deeper inside was quietly exchanging breath with the world. He swept the light across the walls again. The main chamber was wider than he had guessed before sunset, maybe 30 feet across at its broadest point. The ceiling rose unevenly overhead, lost in shadow in places. Along the eastern wall, a vertical crack split the stone from floor to ceiling, no wider than 2 fingers in some places, widening near the top. Duke walked straight to it. He lowered his nose and sniffed along the base, then lifted his head toward the dark line running upward. Travis crouched beside him. A faint movement touched the back of his hand. Air, not much, barely enough to stir the fine hairs along his wrist. He clicked off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed everything. For 3 seconds, the cave was black and silent. Then Travis saw it. The campfire outside cast a dim orange pulse at the mouth of the cave. The smoke from the little torch he had left near the entrance drifted inward, not outward. A thin ribbon of gray bent sideways across the chamber, sliding toward the crack in the eastern wall as if pulled by an invisible hand. Travis turned the flashlight back on. "Well," he murmured, "what have we got here?" Duke glanced at him once, then looked back at the crack. For the next hour, Travis worked the cave like an old AO, not with excitement, with method. He pulled a carpenter's pencil from his pack and marked points on the wall. Possible vent, dry channel, low spot, shelter wall, fire unsafe here. He used small stones to mark a walking route across the uneven floor. He noted where dust gathered and where it didn't. He knelt in 3 different places and pressed his palm against the ground. Near the cave entrance, the stone held the day's cold. 20 feet deeper, it was different. Still cool, but steady. A man could work with steady. Duke found the next sign before Travis did. The dog moved toward the back of the main chamber, then stopped near a low opening half hidden behind fallen rock. He sniffed once, then gave a short, sharp breath through his nose. Travis aimed the flashlight. The rear passage had once been larger. Someone had tried to block it. Old timbers lay collapsed across part of the opening, rusted spikes stuck from dark wood. A section of rock had fallen over them, sealing most of the way through, but not all of it. Above the blockage, a narrow gap disappeared into darkness. Travis stepped closer and saw marks on one timber. Saw cuts, not natural deadfall, man-made. He brushed dust away with his gloved hand. Under the dirt, he found a piece of rusted iron rail no longer than his forearm, mining track. He straightened slowly. The cave had not always been empty. Sometime long before Harold laughed at it, somebody had worked here. Somebody had followed a vein into this mountain, braced the passage, hauled ore or stone or something else through the dark, then left it behind. Maybe because the vein ran out. Maybe because the tunnel failed. Maybe because men died in it. The thought sat cold in Travis's chest. From somewhere outside came a hard metallic snap. A branch, maybe. Or the cooling truck. But the sound hit the cave wall and came back wrong. Sharp, flat, like a rifle bolt closing. Travis spun before he could stop himself. His shoulder hit stone. The flashlight beam jumped. His right hand came up with the knife open. Duke wheeled with him, placing himself between Travis and the cave mouth. For half a second, Travis was not in Wyoming anymore. He saw sun through dust, a white flash, a Humvee door hanging open, a young sergeant yelling clear, 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 into a street full of smoke. Then Duke barked once. Not loud, just enough. Travis blinked. The cave returned. The fire outside. The wind. The dog's gray muzzle turned toward him. Travis lowered the knife. His hand was shaking. He closed the blade carefully and clipped it back into his pocket. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm here." Duke stepped closer and pressed his shoulder against Travis's leg. That pressure brought him all the way back. Travis stood there until his breathing slowed. Then he looked again at the blocked passage. He did not like the way it made him feel. He liked even less that he wanted to know what was behind it. By morning, frost silvered the grass outside the cave. Travis had slept in pieces, never longer than 20 minutes at a time. Each time the wind changed, his eyes opened. Each time Duke shifted, his hand reached for the flashlight. At dawn, he walked the perimeter. First the cave mouth, then the slope below, then the ridgeline above, a habit from years ago. Check the approaches, read the ground, know your exits. Duke followed without needing a word. From the upper slope, Travis could see the Bennett Ranch, far below in the valley. The barns sat neat and red against the pale fields. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. Harold had warmth, power, cattle, stored hay, men who answered when he called. Travis had a cave, but as the first sun touched the rock face behind him, he turned and studied the dark opening again. The cave had air. It had dry stone. It had evidence of old passageways deeper inside. And it had Duke's complete attention. That counted for something. Later that morning, Travis drove into town for supplies. Not many. He could not afford many. A roll of marking tape, 2 cheap lanterns, nails, lamp oil, a coil of rope, and a second-hand pry bar from a bin outside the hardware store. At the counter, a man in a seed cap looked at the rope and smiled. Planning to decorate the cave? Someone behind him snorted. Travis kept his eyes on the clerk's hands as she rang up the items. The bell, above the hardware store door, chimed when he left. Outside, 2 boys leaned against a pickup, eating candy bars. One of them saw Duke in the truck and grinned. "Old man and his war dog are going mining." The other laughed. Travis loaded the supplies without looking over. Duke watched the boys through the windshield, still and silent. That silence bothered them more than barking would have. When they returned to the mountain, clouds had moved in from the west. The light over the bighorns had gone flat and metallic. Travis carried the supplies into the cave and tied strips of tape near each crack and low channel he'd marked the night before. The airflow was still there, faint but steady. Duke went straight to the eastern wall again, then turned his head toward the blocked passage. Travis followed his gaze. A thin thread of dust lifted from the gap above the old timbers, not falling, lifting. The mountain was pulling air through the collapse. Travis stepped closer. He held the lantern flame near the opening. The small flame leaned inward, hard. For the first time since the courthouse, he felt something other than loss. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too clean a word. This was smaller, sharper, a question with teeth. He set the lantern down, gripped the pry bar, and wedged it carefully beneath one of the loose stones at the edge of the collapsed tunnel. Duke stood beside him, eyes fixed on the black gap. The stone shifted with a slow scrape. A breath of colder air slid out first. Then came a smell Travis had not expected. Old wood, dry earth, and something metallic, buried deep. He stopped. Duke's ears rose. From somewhere beyond the collapse came a faint sound. Not a growl, not water, a hollow click, followed by silence. Travis tightened his grip on the pry bar. The cave had answered. For several long seconds, neither he nor Duke moved. The faint metallic click had come from somewhere beyond the collapsed tunnel. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to remind him that men had once worked inside this mountain. Maybe they had left something behind. Maybe the mountain itself was shifting. Either way, forcing his way through unstable rock alone would have been stupid. And Travis Walker had survived Iraq by learning the difference between courage and stupidity. He lowered the pry bar. Not today. Duke continued staring into the gap. The dog's ears remained forward, alert, interested, but not afraid. That mattered. Travis backed away from the collapse and returned to the main chamber. The mountain would still be there tomorrow. Over the next week, he focused on something more important: survival. Every morning began before sunrise. Old habits refused to die. Travis woke at the slightest sound, the crack of settling rock, the whistle of wind outside. Once, the metallic clang of a loose lantern hook striking stone jolted him awake so fast he rolled from his blanket and landed in a crouch before realizing where he was. His heart hammered. The cave slowly returned around him. Stone walls, camp stove. Duke lifting his head from across the chamber. Not Iraq, not Baghdad, not another midnight alert, just Wyoming, just the mountain. After that, sleep rarely returned, so he worked. He dug drainage channels near the entrance, stacked stone along sections of the wall, cleared brush from the slope below, built a simple storage rack from salvaged lumber. Duke followed him everywhere. The old shepherd rarely wandered more than 20 feet away. When Travis cut firewood, Duke lay nearby. When Travis surveyed the hillside, Duke sat beside him. When Travis paused to catch his breath, Duke somehow always seemed to know exactly when to rest his head against his owner's leg. By the 8th day, people in town had started talking. Again, the Silver Creek Diner sat beside the main road through town. Every rumor eventually passed through its doors. On Thursday morning, Harold Bennett was already seated at the counter when Sheriff Dana Brooks walked in. The sheriff removed her hat and ordered coffee. Harold nodded toward the mountains. "You hear what Walker's doing?" Dana sighed. I hear a lot of things. He's living in that cave. The waitress rolled her eyes. Not because she disagreed, because she'd already heard the story 3 times. Harold continued anyway. Got that dog living up there too. One ranch hand laughed. Maybe they're both part mountain lion now. A few chuckles followed. Dana stirred her coffee. Dog looked healthy last time I saw him. Healthy? Harold scoffed. He's got that animal sleeping in a hole in the ground. Someone near the window added, Old soldier finally lost it. That phrase spread quickly. By lunchtime, half the town had heard it. By sunset, almost everyone had. The old soldier had lost his mind. Meanwhile, Travis was too busy hauling stone to care, until Sheriff Dana Brooks drove up the mountain the following afternoon. Duke heard the vehicle first. His ears lifted. Then he trotted toward the entrance. Travis emerged from the cave, wiping dust from his hands. The sheriff climbed out of her SUV. Afternoon. Afternoon. She glanced past him. Toward the cave. Toward Duke. Then back again. I got a complaint. Travis wasn't surprised. Harold? Dana smiled slightly. Harold. Duke sat beside Travis without being told. The sheriff looked at the dog. What seems to be the problem, buddy? Duke's tail thumped once. Dana laughed. According to the complaint, you're being neglected. Travis shook his head. That's going to disappoint him. The sheriff spent nearly 20 minutes inspecting everything. Food, water, shelter. Duke followed politely behind her. Never nervous, never aggressive. Then, something unexpected happened. Dana stopped beside the cave entrance. Where's your water source? Before Travis could answer, Duke stood. The shepherd walked several yards uphill, stopped, looked back, then continued. Dana followed, curious. Travis followed too. The dog led them through a narrow patch of brush and over a rocky rise. Beyond it sat a small spring emerging directly from the hillside. Clear water flowed steadily into a shallow basin Travis had reinforced with stone. Dana stared. You built this? Needed water. The sheriff crouched beside the spring. The water was crystal clear, fresh, protected, reliable. Duke drank from it, calmly. Dana stood. Most people in town don't have a backup water source this good. Travis smiled. Guess the dog's suffering. The sheriff laughed. By the time she left, the complaint was effectively dead, but the rumors weren't. 3 days later, Travis returned to town for supplies. The moment he entered the hardware store, conversation dipped slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough. A man near the register nodded toward him. Cave's treating you okay? The question sounded friendly. The smile wasn't. Another man added, Heard you're building yourself an underground palace. More laughter. Travis grabbed the rope he needed. Nothing else. He had spent enough years around barracks and construction crews to recognize when men were trying to provoke a reaction. The best response was usually none at all. As he turned toward the door, an unfamiliar voice stopped him. Does your dog always sleep near the eastern wall? The room went quiet. Travis looked toward the speaker. An old man stood near a display of work gloves. Thin, weathered, white beard, eyes sharp as broken glass. He carried himself differently than the others, like someone who spent more time observing than talking. Travis frowned. What? The old man stepped closer. Your dog, he pointed toward Duke. When he's in the cave. A pause. Does he always sleep near the airflow crack? For the first time all day, Travis felt genuinely surprised, because that was exactly where Duke slept, every night. The old man studied his reaction and nodded slowly, as if that answer alone confirmed something. Then he extended a rough hand. Owen Price. Travis shook it. The old man's grip felt like old leather and stone. Owen glanced toward the mountains, then toward Duke again. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Interesting. What is? Owen looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, That dog knows something about your cave before either of us do. Duke lifted his head. And for the first time since Travis had arrived in Wyoming, it felt like someone else might understand what the mountain was trying to say. The old man purchased a box of nails, tucked it beneath one arm, and headed for the door. Wait, Travis called. Owen Price stopped. The hardware store had gone quiet again. The ranch hands near the stove suddenly found great interest in their coffee cups. What do you mean? Travis asked. Owen studied him for a moment. Not the way curious people study someone. The way experienced men study weather. You got time tomorrow? Depends. It depends on whether you want to understand that cave or die in it. Then he walked out. The bell above the door jingled once. Silence followed. A ranch hand laughed nervously. Old Owen's been talking to rocks too long. Nobody else joined in. Even in Wyoming, some names carried weight. Owen Price was one of them. For 42 years he had worked mines across the Bighorns. Silver, copper, coal. If there was anyone alive who understood what happened beneath mountains, it was him. The next morning, Travis drove north. The road wound through narrow valleys, where frost still clung to the shadows. Duke sat upright in the passenger seat, his nose occasionally pressed against the cracked window. The old miner's cabin appeared shortly after noon. Unlike most homes in the region, it wasn't built on top of the land. It seemed buried inside it, half stone, half timber. The back wall disappeared directly into the hillside. A thin stream of smoke drifted from a metal chimney. Owen was splitting firewood when they arrived. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just buried the axe in a stump. Took you long enough. Ho. Travis climbed out. Duke followed. The shepherd immediately began sniffing around the stone foundation. Owen noticed. So he does that everywhere. Does what? Checks the ground before he checks people. Travis looked down at Duke. The old dog was indeed studying the earth first. Not the cabin, not the man, the ground. The observation made Travis uncomfortable, because it was true. The dog had learned it from him. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar smoke and old leather. Maps covered one wall. Mining charts covered another. Some looked older than Travis himself. Owen poured coffee into 2 dented mugs, then spread a yellowed survey map across the table. The paper crackled with age. That's your mountain. Travis leaned forward. The map showed tunnels, dozens of them, some marked, others crossed out, most abandoned long ago. His cave sat near the center. People mined that ridge from the 1890s into the 1950s. Owen tapped the paper. Most failed. Why? The mountain. The old man shrugged. Mountain decides what stays open. Duke lay beneath the table, silent, listening. Owen pointed again. Your cave isn't dangerous, because it's underground. His finger moved toward a cluster of markings. It's dangerous because it breathes. Travis frowned. The airflow? Exactly. Owen stood and opened a small metal vent near the back wall. A gust of cold air immediately entered, then disappeared upward through another opening. Mountains create pressure. He spoke calmly, patiently, like someone teaching a lesson he had taught before. Cold air moves. Warm air moves. Every tunnel becomes part of a system. Travis thought about the smoke being pulled toward the crack in the eastern wall, the collapsed passage, the strange draft. Owen saw recognition cross his face. Now you're getting it. The old miner sat down. His expression changed slightly. Not fear. Memory. Back in '78, we lost 6 men. The room became very still. Even Duke lifted his head. Owen stared at his coffee. They weren't trapped. He paused. They weren't crushed. The silence stretched. They fell asleep. Travis waited. Bad airflow. Owen rubbed one rough hand across his beard. Smoke built up slow. His eyes remained fixed on the mug. No panic. No warning. Just warmth. Outside, wind touched the cabin walls. The sound seemed distant. Small. By morning, they were gone. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Owen looked up. You know what's dangerous about smoke? Travis nodded. Most people think it's fire. Exactly. The old man pointed toward the mountain visible through the window. The mountain doesn't care how good your fire burns. His voice dropped. It only cares where the smoke goes. Later that afternoon, they climbed to the cave together. Owen moved slower than most men, but he never wasted a step. When they entered the main chamber, he stopped almost immediately. His eyes traveled across the walls, the ceiling, the cracks, the floor, then toward the eastern vent, and finally toward Duke. The shepherd was already lying beside the wall, the exact same place he chose every night. Owen nodded. There. Travis looked. That's where he sleeps. I know. How? The old miner smiled faintly. Because that's where I'd sleep too. He walked over and placed his hand against the stone. Then he closed his eyes. For several seconds he simply stood there, feeling the rock, feeling the airflow, feeling something Travis couldn't yet understand. When Owen opened his eyes again, his voice was quiet. "Your dog knows something before both of us." Travis glanced down at Duke. The shepherd remained calm, resting his head on his paws, as if this spot had always belonged to him. Owen slowly withdrew his hand from the wall. Then he looked toward the fire pit Travis planned to build. His expression hardened. "Be careful." "About what?" The old miner's eyes drifted toward the darkness beyond the collapsed tunnel. "Because, if you build this wrong," his voice trailed off. The mountain wind whispered through the hidden cracks. "That cave won't become a shelter." The silence that followed felt colder than the October air. "It'll become a tomb." The words stayed with Travis long after Owen Price disappeared down the mountain trail. That evening, the old miner's warning seemed to linger in every shadow of the cave. Even the wind sounded different. Duke remained near the eastern wall, watching, listening, waiting. Travis spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Not because he was confident, because he wasn't. Every adjustment mattered now. He widened the drainage trench near the entrance, built a stone platform for sleeping, installed a crude reflector wall behind the future fire pit, using salvaged metal sheets and flat rock. Most importantly, he focused on airflow. Each morning he tied strips of cloth near cracks in the stone. Each afternoon he checked how they moved. Each evening he made notes in a small weathered notebook he had carried since Iraq. Wind, direction, temperature, air movement, moisture, patterns. Combat engineers survived by understanding systems. This cave was becoming a system, and systems could fail. One afternoon, Duke began barking toward the eastern wall. Not aggressively, urgently. Travis walked over. The dog pawed at a narrow crack. Air flowed through it. Strong, steady, stronger than usual. Travis marked it in his notebook. Another detail, another clue. The mountain was talking. He just didn't understand the language yet. By late October, nighttime temperatures dropped below freezing. The first thin layer of snow dusted the upper ridges. The cave was no longer an experiment. It was home. That night, Travis decided to test the heating system. For real. A small, controlled fire burned inside the pit. Nothing excessive, just enough. The flames rose steadily. The reflector wall pushed warmth deeper into the chamber. The smoke appeared to move correctly. Mackie. At first, Duke lay near the eastern wall, watching. The old shepherd seemed relaxed. For the first time in weeks, Travis felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe Owen had been wrong. Maybe he had figured it out. Hours passed. The fire settled into glowing coals. The cave became surprisingly comfortable. The stone floor no longer felt icy. The sleeping platform stayed dry. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, warmth slowly spread. Travis crawled beneath his blanket. Duke remained awake, watching the darkness, as always. The veteran drifted into sleep. Not deep sleep. He never slept deeply anymore. Fragments, short stretches, always listening, always ready. The dream came without warning. Iraq, dust, heat, radio chatter, the interior of a damaged vehicle, someone yelling coordinates, someone screaming for a medic, the smell of burning insulation, the sound of gunfire snapping through narrow streets. Travis tried to move. Couldn't. The smoke thickened. The voices grew distant. Then came a barking sound. Sharp, urgent, repeated. The battlefield shattered. Travis's eyes flew open. For a moment he didn't know where he was. His heart pounded. His hands searched for a weapon. The cave spun around him. Darkness, stone, blankets. Then he saw Duke. The German shepherd was standing over him, barking directly into his face. Not once. Again and again. The dog grabbed Travis's sleeve, pulled, hard. Only then did Travis smell it. Smoke. A lot of smoke. Far too much smoke. His stomach dropped. The cave ceiling had nearly disappeared behind a thick gray layer. Instead of leaving through the ventilation system, the smoke was rolling back into the chamber, toward them, toward the sleeping area, toward the very place Owen had warned him about. The draft had reversed. Move! Travis scrambled to his feet. His head already felt strange, heavy. The smoke was thicker than he realized. Duke backed away from the sleeping platform, coughing. The dog had sensed the danger long before the human did. Travis grabbed a shovel. Dirt flew into the fire pit. Again, again, again. The glowing coals vanished beneath soil. The flames died. but the smoke remained. For several terrifying minutes, it continued drifting through the chamber. The mountain was refusing to let it leave. Travis stumbled toward the entrance. Cold air hit his face. He sucked in a desperate breath. Behind him, Duke emerged from the haze. The shepherd immediately collapsed onto the ground outside, not injured, exhausted. Travis dropped to one knee beside him. The old dog pressed against his chest, both of them breathing hard, both of them alive. The night wind cut across the mountainside. Neither moved for a long time. Above them, stars shone cold and indifferent. Eventually, the smoke inside the cave began to clear, slowly, reluctantly, like a warning, not a mistake, a warning. Near dawn, Travis sat alone beside the entrance. The fire was dead. The cave was cold again. Duke slept beside him, one paw touching his boot. The old shepherd had saved his life. Again, Travis stared into the darkness, beyond the collapsed tunnel. Owen's words echoed in his memory. It'll become a tomb. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, doubt finally broke through. Not fear, something worse. The possibility that everyone else had been right. Harold, the townspeople, the men laughing in the diner. Maybe the cave was impossible. Maybe he was just an aging veteran, chasing a foolish idea. Maybe he had dragged Duke into a losing battle against a mountain that didn't care whether either of them survived. As dawn light slowly touched the ridges above the valley, Travis looked down at the sleeping German shepherd. The old dog trusted him completely, and that made the failure hurt even more. Because if Duke hadn't awakened him when he did, neither of them would have seen another sunrise. Far below, the first lights of town flickered to life. The mountain remained silent. But the question remained, had Travis found a home? Or had he simply built the first stage of his own grave? The question followed him for 3 straight days. It sat beside him while he drank coffee in the cold mornings. It followed him through every trip into town. It waited for him each night when darkness settled over the mountain. The easiest thing would have been to quit, pack the truck, leave the cave behind, find a cheap trailer somewhere south. Forget the whole idea. More than once, Travis found himself staring at the pickup parked below the ridge, thinking about it. Then he would look at Duke, and the thought would disappear. The old German shepherd had trusted him through deserts, storms, highways, and years of uncertainty. Walking away now felt wrong, so Travis did what he had always done when faced with failure. He went back to the problem. One cold morning before sunrise, he sat near the dead fire pit with a notebook in his lap. Duke slept beside the eastern wall, the exact same place. Again, Travis watched him for several minutes. Then something clicked. The dog never chose that location by accident. Never. Not once. In Iraq, canine handlers often joked that dogs noticed danger long before humans did. Changes in scent, pressure, airflow, tiny details people ignored. Duke had been telling him something for weeks. Travis simply hadn't listened carefully enough. By mid-morning, he began testing the cave again. Not the fire, the air. He tied strips of bright survey tape throughout the chamber, near cracks, near the entrance, near the collapsed tunnel, near the sleeping platform. Then he sat and watched. For hours, the mountain slowly revealed its patterns. Some airflow remained constant, some changed with outside wind direction, some disappeared entirely by sunset. By the second day, he filled pages of notes. Combat engineers survived by understanding systems, bridges, roads, fortifications, drainage, ventilation. Every system followed rules. The cave had rules too. He simply needed to learn them. Duke helped without realizing it. Whenever the dog settled down, Travis paid attention. Whenever Duke changed sleeping locations, Travis marked it. Whenever Duke paused near a crack or vent, Travis investigated. Again and again, the dog's instincts pointed toward useful information. One afternoon, Duke stopped near a section of wall Travis had ignored for weeks. The shepherd sniffed the rock, then sat. Travis approached. A faint current of air brushed his face. Hidden, subtle, but real. Another vent, another piece of the puzzle. Good catch, partner. Duke's tail tapped the ground. The next week transformed everything. Travis widened certain airflow channels, sealed others. He built a secondary escape route for smoke, using a narrow shaft created by natural fractures in the stone. He lowered part of the sleeping area, using canvas and timber to trap warmth closer to where it was needed. He added gravel to sections of damp floor, created better drainage. improved circulation, reduced moisture. Nothing happened quickly. Every improvement came through trial and error. But slowly, the cave began changing. The first sign appeared one morning after a hard freeze. The water bucket near the sleeping platform hadn't frozen, not completely. Only a thin layer of ice coated the surface. That had never happened before. 2 days later, Travis noticed something else. His blanket felt dry when he woke up. Not damp, not cold, dry. The cave was holding heat longer. The stone itself seemed to be helping. By the end of the month, the difference was impossible to ignore. One evening, he allowed a small fire to burn for several hours. Then he let it die, completely. No flames, no coals, nothing. The next morning, the cave remained noticeably warmer than the outside air. Not hot, not even comfortable by normal standards, but warmer, stable, predictable. Exactly what survival demanded. That night, Travis slept for nearly 4 uninterrupted hours. The longest stretch since arriving in Wyoming. When he woke, Duke was still sleeping, curled against the wall. Peaceful. Outside, the wind howled across the ridge. Inside, the cave remained quiet. For the first time since Emily died, Travis felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness. Not yet. Something closer to confidence. The mountain wasn't fighting him anymore. It was teaching him. A few days later, he drove into town for supplies. The same men still sat inside the diner. The same jokes floated around the room. The same laughter followed him. But this time it felt different, because while they laughed, Travis knew something they didn't. The cave was working. He didn't need to argue. Results would speak eventually. As he loaded supplies into the truck, a weather alert flashed across a television hanging above the diner counter. Most people barely noticed. A meteorologist pointed toward a growing storm system forming across the northern Rockies. The forecast called for an unusually harsh winter pattern. Possible record snowfall, possible early-season blizzards. Most ranchers shrugged it off. Wyoming always had storms. Nothing new. But Travis paused. Years of reading terrain and weather had taught him one lesson. Nature rarely announced disaster loudly. It whispered first. He watched the forecast for another moment, then climbed into the truck. Duke settled into the passenger seat. As they drove toward the mountain, dark clouds gathered far beyond the western horizon, almost too far away to matter. Almost. By sunset, Travis stood outside the cave, watching the last light fade across the bighorns. The air felt different, colder, heavier. Duke stood beside him. The shepherd's ears pointed toward the distant ridges. The dog remained completely still, listening, watching, waiting. Far beyond the mountains, winter had begun moving toward them. And neither of them knew just how much snow it intended to bring. November arrived quietly. That was what bothered Travis. After years spent working construction projects overseas and surviving enough harsh seasons in Wyoming, he had learned that the worst trouble often arrived without announcing itself. The mountain seemed almost too calm. For several days, the wind disappeared. Not weakened, disappeared. The tall pines surrounding the ridge stood motionless beneath pale skies. The silence felt unnatural. One morning, Travis stepped outside with a cup of coffee and immediately noticed something missing. Birdsong. The ridge should have been alive with it. Instead, the forest seemed empty. Duke noticed it too. The old shepherd stood beside him, staring toward the tree line. Ears forward, body stiff, watching, waiting. The dog spent less time sleeping now. He often positioned himself near the cave entrance for hours at a time. Sometimes he would rise suddenly and scan the distant slopes for reasons Travis couldn't understand. Other times, he would move directly to the eastern wall and listen to the hidden airflow inside the mountain, as if checking on something, as if preparing. One afternoon, Travis drove into town for fuel and supplies. The weather forecast played on a television mounted above the diner counter. A meteorologist stood before a map covered in blue and purple colors. Long-range models continue showing an unusual Arctic pattern developing across the northern Rockies. Most people barely paid attention. A rancher laughed. "We hear that every year." Another nodded. Weather guys always want something dramatic. The conversation quickly shifted to cattle prices. Travis watched for another minute before leaving. The forecast bothered him. Not because of what the meteorologist said, because of what he remembered. Back in Iraq, experienced soldiers learned to notice patterns. When traffic suddenly disappeared from a road. When local shop owners closed early. When birds vanished from an area, small details often arrived before larger events. Nature followed similar rules. That evening, he stopped by Owen Price's cabin. The old miner was stacking firewood beneath a lean-to. Without looking up, Owen said, "You noticed it too." Travis frowned. "The birds." Owen nodded. "And the deer." That got Travis's attention. "What about them?" "Haven't seen a single one near the lower ridge in 4 days." The old miner drove another piece of wood into the stack. "That's unusual." A cold breeze moved across the hillside. Not strong, just enough. Travis looked toward the mountains. "What do you think's coming?" Owen stared toward the western horizon. The answer took several seconds. "Something big." Neither man said anything after that. The mountains seemed to fill the silence itself. Back at the cave, Travis began making preparations. Not because he was certain, because uncertainty killed people. He hauled additional firewood up the ridge, more than he thought he would need. Then he hauled more. He reinforced sections of the entrance wall, expanded storage space, filled extra water containers, checked airflow channels every morning and every night. Duke followed every step, sometimes helping in strange ways. One afternoon, the dog stopped beside a pile of loose stones Travis intended to use later. He refused to leave. Eventually, Travis investigated. The stones partially blocked one of the smaller ventilation paths, a path he had overlooked. By sunset, it was cleared. Another problem solved. Another warning noticed. As the days passed, townspeople continued laughing. The jokes never stopped. One morning, Harold Bennett encountered Travis outside the feed store. Harold glanced at the supplies loaded into the pickup. Extra fuel, extra rope, more lumber. "You building a fortress now?" Travis closed the tailgate. "Just preparing." Harold smirked. "For what?" "The winter." The rancher laughed. A few men nearby joined him. Harold shook his head. "You've spent too much time in that cave." Travis climbed into the truck without answering. The laughter followed him all the way to the road. By the time he reached the mountain, dark clouds had appeared beyond the western ridges, still distant, still harmless looking. But they hadn't been there yesterday. That night the temperature dropped sharply, much faster than expected. Frost covered the slope before midnight. Duke refused to settle down. The old shepherd paced between the entrance and the eastern wall, again and again and again. At one point he stood outside for nearly 10 minutes, staring into darkness, not barking, not growling, simply watching. Travis sat near the fire and observed him. Years ago, Duke had alerted to roadside bombs before human eyes could detect anything unusual. He had warned patrols about hidden threats. He had sensed danger in ways nobody fully understood. The dog was behaving exactly the same way now. Near midnight, Travis stepped outside. The mountain air felt different, heavy. The pressure seemed wrong somehow. His ears popped slightly. Above him, clouds drifted across the moon. Fast, very fast, much faster than the wind near the ground. Another sign. Duke moved beside him. The shepherd stared toward the northern horizon. Then, for the first time since Travis had adopted him, the old dog lifted his head toward the sky and released a long, mournful howl. The sound rolled across the dark mountains, echoing through the valleys, lingering among the ridges. Then silence returned. Duke lowered his head, but his eyes never left the darkness beyond the mountains, as if he could already see something still days away. Something enormous, something moving toward them through the night. It arrived 3 days later. The first snow began just after sunrise. Small flakes drifted lazily across the mountainside. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. By noon, the ridge was white. By evening, the wind had arrived. And by midnight, the mountain disappeared. Travis stood at the cave entrance watching the storm erase the world. The trees vanished first, then the lower slopes, then the trail leading toward town. Snow no longer fell from the sky. It flew sideways. Driven by winds that screamed across the bighorns like freight trains. Duke stood beside him. The old shepherd's fur whipped violently in the gusts. Neither moved for several minutes. Both understood. The storm had arrived. Inside the cave, Travis immediately shifted into work mode. No panic. No wasted motion. Years earlier, combat engineers learned one rule above all others. Preparation was survival. He checked every ventilation channel, every drainage trench, every water container, every section of the entrance wall. Then he checked them again. Outside, The storm intensified. Snow piled against the outer barrier faster than he thought possible. By dawn, nearly 3 feet already covered the slope. The radio forecast became increasingly grim. Road closures, power failures, emergency advisories. Then, even the radio signal disappeared beneath static. After that, they were alone. The second day proved worse. Far worse. The wind never stopped. The 22's vision. The wind. Sometimes it sounded like a distant jet engine. Other times it screamed through the rocks around the cave entrance with a sharp, haunting whistle. The mountain seemed alive, angry, determined. Several times Travis woke from brief naps, because the airflow inside the cave changed pitch. Each time, he immediately grabbed a flashlight. Each time, he checked the vents. The mountain was breathing differently now. The pressure outside kept shifting. Ice formed where it hadn't before. Snow packed into cracks. Every hour brought a new problem. Near noon, Duke suddenly jumped to his feet. The dog barked sharply toward the eastern wall. One bark, then another. Travis was moving before he even knew why. The shepherd raced toward a narrow airflow shaft. Snowmelt and ice had begun clogging part of it. Not enough to stop airflow, yet, but enough to become dangerous later. Travis cleared it immediately. When he finished, Duke relaxed. Another crisis avoided. The old dog had sensed it before the human did. Again, by the second night, snowfall exceeded 6 feet in some areas. The cave remained stable, warm, dry. Everything Travis had built was finally being tested, and so far, it was holding. The townspeople's laughter felt very far away now. Around midnight, a sound jolted Travis awake. A deep cracking noise, followed by a roar. For one terrible second, he thought the cave itself was collapsing. His body reacted before his mind. He rolled from his blanket, heart racing, hand reaching instinctively toward the knife beside his bedroll. The cave vanished. For half a second, he was back in Iraq. An explosion, dust, collapsed concrete, radio chatter, contact, contact, contact. Then Duke barked. The cave returned. Reality returned. Travis forced himself to breathe. The noise had come from outside, not inside. An avalanche somewhere across the ridge. Nothing more. He sat quietly for several minutes, waiting for his pulse to slow. Duke rested his head on Travis's knee. The familiar pressure grounded him. The flashback faded. Outside, the storm continued. Toward dawn, on the third day, conditions became even worse. The snowfall had reached nearly 8 feet in exposed areas. Drifts buried entire sections of the mountain. The cave entrance now resembled a tunnel through packed snow. Visibility outside measured only a few yards. Travis checked the primary vent shortly after sunrise. Everything seemed normal. Then he heard Duke growl. Low. Urgent. The shepherd stood near the entrance, staring upward. Travis followed his gaze. A section of ice had formed above the outer airflow shaft. Large, heavy, unstable. The weight worried him immediately. If it collapsed into the vent opening, airflow could be restricted. The same problem that nearly killed them weeks earlier. He grabbed a shovel. I'll be right back. The moment he stepped outside, the wind hit him like a physical blow. Snow blasted across his face. Visibility dropped almost instantly. Travis fought his way uphill toward the vent. Each step felt harder than the last. The ice formation loomed above him, larger than expected. He raised the shovel and began chipping away at its edge. Chunks fell harmlessly into the snow. Good. Another strike. More ice broke free. Then came a sharp crack. Wrong. The sound instantly triggered every survival instinct he possessed. Move. Now. Travis lunged sideways. A section of ice detached from above. Not enormous, but large enough. The frozen mass slammed into the slope exactly where he had been standing. Snow exploded upward. The impact shook the hillside. Before Travis could regain his footing, his boot slipped. The ground vanished beneath him. For one terrifying moment, he slid toward a buried drop-off, hidden beneath the snow. Then something grabbed his coat. Hard, violently. Travis stopped. He twisted around. Duke. The German shepherd had launched himself forward and seized the back of Travis's heavy jacket. The dog dug all 4 paws into the snow, holding, pulling, refusing to let go. For several seconds, neither moved. Wind screamed around them. Then Travis slowly regained his footing. He climbed back toward stable ground. Only then did Duke release the coat. The veteran dropped to one knee beside him. Good boy. The words barely escaped through the wind. Then Travis noticed something. Duke wasn't standing correctly. The shepherd shifted his weight, favoring one side. Travis's stomach tightened. A jagged chunk of falling ice had struck the dog's shoulder during the collapse. Not enough to break the leg, but enough. Duke took a step, then another. A slight limp appeared. The old shepherd tried to hide it, as working dogs often did. But Travis saw it immediately. The sight hit harder than the storm itself, because without Duke, he would already be buried somewhere beneath the mountain. The wind continued howling. The storm showed no sign of ending. And now the one creature Travis trusted most was injured, far below the ridge, hidden beneath endless snow. The valley was fighting its own battle, but Travis couldn't see any of it yet. All he could see was Duke limping beside him as they disappeared back into the shelter. And for the first time since the storm began, a new fear entered the cave, not for himself, for the dog. Travis wrapped Duke's shoulder with an old field bandage from the medical pouch he kept in his pack. The cloth was faded and stiff from years of being carried through places he no longer talked about, but it still held. Duke lay on the warmest section of stone near the eastern wall, eyes half open, breathing steady. "Stay down," Travis said. Duke watched him without moving. Outside, the storm dragged its claws across the ridge for the rest of the day and into another night. The cave held. The vents held. The water remained unfrozen. The fire stayed small and controlled, its heat moving into the stone instead of vanishing into smoke. But Travis did not sleep. Each time Duke shifted, Travis opened his eyes. Each time the wind changed pitch, he checked the airflow. And sometime before dawn on the fourth day, he stepped outside and saw what the storm had left behind. The valley was gone. Not covered. Gone. 8 feet of snow had smoothed the world into a white, silent shape. Fence lines had disappeared. The road to town no longer existed. Pine trees stood buried to their lower branches, their dark tops rising like islands from an endless frozen sea. Travis stood in the cave entrance with the wind cutting across his face. Then he looked toward Bennett Ranch. At first, the distance was only a pale blur. He lifted the binoculars. The ranch buildings sat far below, half swallowed by drifts. The barn roof showed. Part of the house showed. The chimney showed. But there was no smoke. Travis lowered the binoculars. Waited. Raised them again. Still nothing. No smoke. No movement. No dark line from the stovepipe. His jaw tightened. Duke came limping to the entrance behind him. "No," Travis said without looking back. The dog ignored him. Travis turned. Duke stood on 3 strong legs and one injured one, his bandaged shoulder held stiff. His ears pointed toward the valley. He had seen it too, or smelled it, or understood it in whatever way dogs understood things before people did. Travis looked down the slope again. Harold had plenty of pride. Too much. He also had Martha in that house. And Luke, 16 years old, tall, quiet, always looking at the ground whenever adults argued. Travis remembered the boy holding Emily's prayer card at the funeral. He remembered Luke crying when he thought nobody was looking. The wind cut through Travis's coat. He went back inside. Preparation took 15 minutes. No more. He packed rope, water, a small first aid kit, a folding shovel, emergency blankets, a flare, matches sealed in waxed paper, and a hatchet. He tied orange cloth strips to his belt for route marking. Then he took a long piece of cord and looped one end around Duke's harness. Duke stood still while Travis secured it. "You shouldn't come." The dog looked at him. Travis held that stare for a moment. Then he clipped the cord. "Fine, but you stay close." The descent took nearly 2 hours. Every step had to be earned. Travis moved the way he had moved years ago through uncertain ground overseas. Slow, scanning, testing before committing weight. He used the shovel handle like a probe, pushing down through powder until he found ice crust, rock, or nothing. No careless steps, no shortcuts. He marked the route every 30 yards with orange cloth tied to branches or exposed fence wire. Duke followed behind him, limping but steady. Twice, the dog stopped before Travis did. The first time, Travis found a hidden drainage cut beneath the snow. The second time, a buried section of barbed wire waited just below the surface. Duke had smelled metal, or old rust, or something Travis never would have noticed in time. "Good catch," Travis murmured. The dog continued. By the time they reached the lower pasture, Travis's legs burned. His beard had frosted at the edges. His gloves were stiff. Still no smoke rose from the Bennett house. The final 100 yards were the hardest. Snow had drifted against the front porch nearly to the windowsills. The front door was sealed behind packed ice. Travis circled to the side. Duke limped ahead, nose low. He stopped near the kitchen wall and barked once. Travis cleared snow from a half-buried side door. The handle would not turn. He struck the ice around the frame with the hatchet. Once, twice, again. The sound cracked across the silent ranch. Inside, something moved. A faint thump. Then another. Travis leaned close. "Harold." Nothing. Then a weak voice answered from somewhere inside. "Walker?" Travis kept chopping. The frame finally gave. He put his shoulder into the door and forced it inward. Cold air rolled out. Too cold. Much too cold. The kitchen was dim. A chair had been broken apart near the stove. Cabinet doors stood open. The fire inside the old wood stove was nearly dead. Only a few red coals buried under gray ash. Martha Bennett sat wrapped in blankets beside the table, her face pale, her hands shaking around an empty mug. Harold stood near the stove, or tried to. He looked smaller than Travis had ever seen him. His eyes went first to Travis, then Duke, then the gear hanging from Travis's coat. "The cave held," Harold said. It was not a question. Travis nodded once. "Where's Luke?" Martha made a small sound. Harold turned toward the hallway. Travis moved past him. No argument. No time. Luke lay on a couch in the living room, beneath 2 blankets and a horse saddle pad. His face was too white. His lips had a faint blue tint. His breathing was shallow. Travis's body shifted into a rhythm, older than thought. Assess. Airway. Breathing. Pulse. Warm center first. Don't rub frozen limbs. Don't panic. He pulled an emergency blanket from his pack and wrapped Luke's torso. Then another around his head and neck. Duke limped to the boy and pressed his body gently against the couch, offering warmth without being told. Martha began crying quietly. Harold stood frozen in the doorway. Travis looked at him. "Can he walk?" Harold's mouth moved before sound came out. "I don't know. He has to." Outside, wind moved snow against the house with a soft, endless hiss. Travis tightened the blanket around Luke. "Because if he stays here, he won't make it through another night." Harold looked toward the dead stove, then toward the white-covered windows, then finally back to Travis. The old pride in his face cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. "What do we do?" For the first time in years, Harold Bennett was not giving orders. He was asking Travis Walker how to survive. Travis looked at the dying stove, then at Luke, then at the frost creeping along the inside walls of the house. The decision had already been made. We leave now. Harold stared toward the windows. The storm had weakened, but the mountain remained buried beneath 8 feet of snow. "Now?" he asked. "If we wait until dark, Luke won't make it." Nobody argued. Not Martha, not Harold, not even Luke, when Travis knelt beside him and helped him sit up. The boy's eyes were unfocused, his movements sluggish, but he was conscious. That was enough. Within 15 minutes they were moving. Travis led. Luke walked beside him, wrapped in blankets and emergency insulation. Martha followed. Harold stayed close behind. Duke limped through the snowpack, refusing to remain in the house. The old shepherd moved more slowly now, but his eyes remained alert. The climb felt endless. Snow reached their knees, sometimes their waists. More than once, Martha stumbled. Each time Travis stopped and helped her regain balance. The wind pushed against them from the ridge, not violently anymore, just enough to remind them how small they were. Harold rarely spoke. When he did, it was only to check on Luke. The rancher who once laughed at the cave now fought simply to reach it. Hours later, the mountain finally revealed the entrance. At first, it looked like nothing more than a dark scar in the snow-covered hillside. Then Travis pulled away part of the outer barrier. Warm air touched their faces. Everyone stopped, even Harold. The difference felt impossible. Outside, the cold cut through clothing and skin. Inside, the air remained steady. Dry. Comfortable. Alive. Martha covered her mouth. For a moment she simply stood there staring. The cave glowed softly from lantern light reflecting against the stone walls. The sleeping platform remained dry. Water buckets stood unfrozen. Firewood remained stacked neatly along the rear wall. The fire itself burned low and controlled. No roaring blaze, no wasted fuel. Just heat. Stored heat. the kind Travis had spent weeks learning from the mountain. Luke took 2 steps inside, then 3. The tension left his shoulders almost immediately. His breathing eased. His body seemed to understand safety before his mind did. Martha's eyes filled with tears. Oh my God. It was barely a whisper. Harold entered last. The cave fell quiet. Nobody rushed him. Nobody said a word. The rancher slowly removed one glove. Then, another. Think. He approached the eastern wall where Duke often slept. His hand touched the stone. He froze. The rock was warm, not hot, not heated by a nearby flame. Warm. Heat stored from hours earlier. Released slowly back into the chamber. The same stone he once mocked. The same cave he once called worthless. Harold stared at it for several seconds, then looked around. Really looked. The airflow channels, the gravel drainage, the carefully positioned sleeping area, the stacked supplies, the dry blankets. Every detail suddenly told a story. Not luck, not madness, work, weeks of it, months of observation, patience, knowledge. The cave wasn't surviving, despite winter. It was surviving because Travis had learned how to work with the mountain instead of fighting it. Luke sat near the sleeping platform and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. The color slowly began returning to his face. Martha sat beside him. Relief washed across her features. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until now. Harold remained standing, still staring. Eventually, he looked toward Travis. The veteran sat beside the fire, checking Duke's shoulder. The old dog didn't complain, didn't whine. He simply rested his head on Travis's leg. The bandage around his shoulder showed faint traces of blood beneath the cloth. Harold noticed it. What happened? Travis glanced down at Duke. Ice fall. Harold frowned. The dog got hurt? He pulled me out before it got worse. Silence followed. Harold looked at Duke again. Really looked this time. The limp, the gray muzzle, the old scars hidden beneath the fur, the loyalty. The cave suddenly seemed different. Everything seemed different. The people in town had called Travis crazy, called him stubborn, called him foolish. Yet the warmest place in the valley now sat inside the mountain. And the man everyone laughed at was the reason his family was still alive. Outside, darkness settled over the ridge. The storm clouds finally began breaking apart. Stars appeared one by one above the frozen wilderness. Inside the cave, the fire crackled softly. Luke slept. Martha rested. Harold sat alone near the eastern wall, his hand resting against the warm stone. Not speaking, not apologizing, just thinking. Across the chamber, Duke suddenly tried to stand. The shepherd made it halfway up before his injured shoulder buckled. He collapsed back onto the blank. Travis moved instantly. Concern flashed across his face. The dog lifted his head but didn't rise again. For the first time since the rescue, something deeper than exhaustion showed in his eyes. The limp was getting worse, and as Travis knelt beside him, a new fear settled quietly over the shelter. The storm might finally be ending, but Duke's fight was only beginning. The cave was silent except for the occasional crackle from the fire. Outside, the mountain still carried the scars of the blizzard. Inside, another battle had begun. Travis barely slept, not because of the weather, because of Duke. The old German shepherd lay near the eastern wall where he had spent most of the winter. The bandage around his shoulder had been replaced twice. The swelling worried Travis more than he admitted aloud. Several times each night he checked the injury by lantern light. Several times Duke opened one eye and thumped his tail weakly against the stone, as if reassuring him, as if saying he was still there. The sight hurt more than any physical wound Travis had carried home from Iraq. 3 nights after the rescue, Luke finally regained his strength. Color returned to his face. His hands stopped shaking. The boy spent long hours sitting beside Duke, sometimes reading old magazines, sometimes simply talking. The shepherd listened to every word. One afternoon, Luke scratched behind Duke's ears and smiled. "You know you saved all of us, right?" Duke's tail moved once. Travis looked away. The cave suddenly felt too quiet, too emotional, the kind of moment Emily would have loved. That thought lingered longer than usual. Across the chamber, Harold Bennett watched everything and said very little. The silence between him and Travis had changed. It was no longer hostile, just unfinished. One evening, after Martha and Luke had fallen asleep, Harold approached the fire. The flames reflected softly against the stone walls. Neither man spoke at first. The mountain breathed quietly through the vents overhead, a sound Travis had come to trust. Finally, Harold broke the silence. I hated you. Travis stared into the fire. I know. I blamed you. The veteran nodded. I know that too. Harold rubbed his hands together slowly. The motion looked nervous, uncertain, almost uncomfortable. Years of anger had apparently been easier than honesty. The rancher stared toward the sleeping forms across the cave. His wife, his nephew, Duke. Then he looked back at the fire. You know what the worst part is? Travis waited. Harold's voice dropped. It wasn't really your fault. The words seemed to surprise even him. For several seconds, he simply listened to the wind outside, then continued. Emily got sick long before she admitted it. The fire popped softly. She kept working anyway. Travis remained silent. Harold swallowed. I knew. That got Travis's attention. The older man stared at the flames, unable to look anywhere else. I saw her coughing. A pause. I saw how exhausted she was. Another pause. I kept telling myself she'd be fine. The cave seemed smaller suddenly, more intimate, more fragile. I needed help at the ranch. Harold's voice cracked slightly, so I let her keep going. The confession hung heavily between them. Years of blame, years of bitterness, years of resentment, all shifting, not disappearing, but shifting. The truth often arrived quietly, not dramatically, just enough to change everything. Harold rubbed his eyes. For the first time since Travis had known him, the rancher looked old, not powerful, not intimidating, just tired. I buried that guilt by blaming you. The fire settled lower. I guess that was easier. Neither man spoke for a long time. The mountain filled the silence. Eventually, Travis looked toward Duke. The old shepherd slept peacefully despite the injury, one paw twitching occasionally as if chasing some distant dream. He would have hated this conversation. Harold glanced over. The dog? Travis nodded. He always preferred actions. A faint smile touched Harold's face, his first genuine smile in years. Then it disappeared again. Why'd you come get us? The question finally arrived. Travis had known it would. He considered several answers. Most of them sounded good. None felt true. Finally, he said, because Luke was watching. Harold frowned. Travis stared toward the sleeping boy. When I was overseas, I learned something. The old memories drifted close. Not painful this time, just present. Young people remember what adults do during bad times. The firelight reflected in his eyes. I didn't want him remembering that I left people behind. The words settled into the cave. Simple, honest, enough. Harold lowered his head. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then something unexpected happened. The rancher quietly nodded, as though accepting a truth he should have understood years earlier. Across the chamber, Duke suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched. The old shepherd slowly struggled to his feet. The limp remained, but it seemed slightly better. Only slightly. He walked toward the two men, carefully, deliberately, then settled down between them, exactly between them. As if placing himself where the distance used to be. Travis laughed softly. Harold shook his head, still bossing everyone around. I'm Attic. Duke closed his eyes. The fire crackled. The mountain breathed. And for the first time since Emily Bennett Walker died, the anger that had divided the valley began to loosen its grip. Not because anyone won, not because anyone surrendered, but because one old dog refused to let either man stay buried beneath the weight of the past. Outside, the storm finally released the mountains. Inside, another kind of thaw had begun. The first road crews reached the lower valley nearly 2 weeks later. By then, stories had already spread faster than the snowmelt. People arriving in town heard the same version from different mouths. A ranch family trapped by the worst storm in decades. A cave everyone laughed at. A veteran who crossed 8 feet of snow to bring them home. And a German shepherd that refused to quit. At first, most people treated it like another mountain story. Wyoming had plenty of those. But then, Harold Bennett started telling the story himself. That changed everything. One morning, Travis drove into town for supplies. For a moment, he almost turned around. Old habits, months of ridicule were difficult to forget, but something felt different the instant he stepped inside the feed store. The laughter was gone. The whispers were gone. Men nodded respectfully. Several even stepped aside to let him pass. One rancher removed his hat. Glad your shelter held. Travis paused. The words sounded strange, not because they were dramatic, because they were sincere. Outside, another truck pulled into the parking lot. Harold climbed out, carrying feed sacks. The same Harold who once mocked the cave. The same Harold who told everyone Travis had lost his mind. A few people glanced between them, waiting. Instead, Harold simply walked over. "You heading up the mountain?" Travis nodded. "I'll bring those vent brackets later." No explanation, no awkwardness, just an agreement. People noticed. The valley noticed. The change spread. Spring arrived slowly across the bighorns. Snow retreated from the lower slopes first. Creeks reappeared. Mud replaced ice. Then one afternoon, a pair of state emergency officials arrived at the cave. They weren't alone. A rescue coordinator came with them, then a county engineer, then another. Each of them wanted to see the shelter. They walked through the chamber carefully, examining the airflow, studying the drainage system, inspecting the stone walls. One man spent nearly 20 minutes near the eastern vent, taking notes. Another measured temperatures throughout the cave. When they finished, they gathered near the entrance. The rescue coordinator shook his head. "Incredible." Travis shrugged. "It works." The man smiled. "That's exactly the point." Several weeks later, county officials returned with a proposal. The cave would become an official emergency mountain shelter, a place travelers could reach during winter storms, a place rescuers could use during blizzards, a place designed around the lessons Travis had learned. The idea felt surreal. Months earlier, the cave had been a joke. Now professionals wanted to study it. The mountain seemed amused by the irony. Not long afterward, volunteers began helping. Nolan Reed hauled cedar beams. Pastor Ray Coleman delivered supplies. Sheriff Dana Brooks coordinated emergency maps. Even Martha spent weekends organizing blankets and storage shelves. The greatest surprise came from Harold. Without making a speech or asking for recognition, he paid for most of the expansion materials. Additional ventilation supports, emergency equipment, structural improvements. Whenever someone thanked him, he simply changed the subject. Perhaps some debts could never be fully repaid, but a man could still try. Throughout all of it, Duke remained at Travis's side. The shoulder healed, slowly. The limp never disappeared completely. Age had already begun catching up with him long before the storm. Now it showed more clearly. He slept longer, moved slower, preferred sunny patches of ground whenever he could find them, but his eyes remained sharp. His ears still lifted whenever the wind changed, and every evening he returned to the same section of warm stone near the eastern wall. His place. One warm afternoon in late spring, Travis found himself sitting outside the cave entrance, watching workers finish installing the final sign. Children from town wandered around the shelter, laughing, exploring, asking questions. The mountain looked completely different now. Green patches had begun returning to the slopes. The scars of winter were fading. Near the entrance stood a newly mounted bronze plaque. Simple, clean, permanent. It read, "Built by a veteran, protected by a dog." Travis stared at it for a long time, then looked toward Duke. Unquote. The old German shepherd lay beneath the afternoon sun, his muzzle completely gray now, one ear bent slightly from an old injury. A survivor's face, a good face, a familiar face. Nearby, a group of school children toured the shelter with one of the county officials. They listened while the man explained airflow and emergency preparedness. Most seemed interested. One boy seemed fascinated. Eventually, the child wandered away from the group and approached Travis. "Excuse me, sir?" Travis looked up. The boy pointed toward the cave. "Who came up with all this?" For a moment, Travis considered the question. The airflow, the shelter, the systems, the survival, the second chance. Then he smiled. Not toward the boy, toward Duke. The shepherd had already fallen asleep. Warm sunlight covered his fur. Peaceful, safe, home. Travis nodded toward him. "I just listened." The boy followed his gaze. "To your dog?" "Yep." The child laughed. Travis didn't, because it was the truth. Long before the engineers, long before the rescue teams, long before the storm, Duke had known. The airflow, the danger, the safe places, the warnings, the mountain itself. The old dog had been listening from the very beginning. Travis simply learned to pay attention. The boy looked at Duke again, then smiled. "He's a pretty smart dog." "He is." The wind drifted softly through the eastern vent, the same steady breath that had first caught Duke's attention months earlier. the same breath that now moved through a shelter built to save lives. The mountain had never changed, only the people had. And as the afternoon sunlight stretched across the bighorns, nobody remembered the cave as the place of a failed veteran anymore. Nobody remembered the jokes, or the laughter, or the humiliation. They remembered something else. A winter when an entire valley nearly disappeared beneath 8 feet of snow. A veteran who refused to quit. A German shepherd who refused to leave his side. And a mountain that kept teaching lessons to anyone willing to listen. A German shepherd who refused to leave his side. If you believe loyalty, like Duke's, is something every person is lucky to experience even once in life, leave a simple 1 in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog, a friend, or a family member who stood by you during your hardest times, leave a 2. I read every comment, and I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more powerful stories of veterans, loyal dogs, survival, courage, and second chances waiting for you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of the people who stand beside you, and never underestimate the quiet heroes walking on 4 legs. See you in the next story.